remember when the idea of a UniFi NAS was kind of a pipe dream? Everyone was asking Ubiquiti to go ahead and create a NAS system because a lot of users wanted that closed network environment with their other Ubiquiti and UniFi devices. Now, about 3 months ago, UniFi finally bowed to pressure and launched publicly their UNAS Pro solution there. Two positives and negatives, and that's really what's brought this video about. 3 months on since the official launch of that product, we've seen numerous updates from the brand, we've seen lots of good news, lots of bad news, and ultimately a lot of real-world use of their new UNAS Pro solution. Today, we're going to be going through a lot of that, thanks to a lot of the help from, let's face it, you guys. After reaching out on Reddit, I asked a lot of users to give me their own 1, 2, and 3 month reviews of using this system. The good, the bad, what they liked, what they didn't, where they saw areas of improvement. And that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to go through all of that information, condensed down, and hopefully by the end of this, if you are intending to get yourself a UNAS Pro, or you're looking at it going, I'm not so sure, hopefully this will give you a better understanding of where the system is at now, where they hope the system to be, and where the room for improvement needs to be done. But before we get into the roots of the thing, we've got to at least acknowledge that any video that goes through the negatives of any product without sufficient balance towards the positive is always going to look incredibly tipped as far as scales go. When we buy any solution, we want it to do the job we ask it to do.
Just do your job the very best you can. That's all we need. We don't need anything else.
And because of that expectation, we often take for granted that a thing that does the job it's supposed to isn't really considered a positive. We just consider that I paid my money, I got what I wanted. So before we get into the weeds of where there is improvements, I do think it's worth highlighting that for a start, one of the consensus points across all of the feedback I got from real world users and other reviewers about the UNAS Pro was number one, it is exceptional value for money. Is a repeated point everywhere you see it. $499 for a 7-bay 10GBE turnkey NAS solution is incredible in this market space right now.
Overall, I'm happy with the product. For the price, it is a well-built old-school style NAS that is incredibly easy to use. It's not the fastest unit on the block, and I wish it had a RAM slot that could be populated for caching. But for $500, you get what you pay for. It's by no means a server, but I will continue to use it as the daily workhorse that feeds my network.
You would not only get a competitive solution at that price in the desktop form, but in rack mount, it is largely unheard of. The next thing that was a consistent thread in all the feedback I got, for the most part, I should say actually, was that this is not a solution that has been designed to compete with Synology, QNAP and the others. It is not a fully featured solution. And more we're getting the indication that UniFi want this solution to be pure storage with some extras at the moment. And as long as it's judged in that fashion, and that's what you want, the UNAS Pro will rarely disappoint because it is a storage system that works within a UniFi environment more than anything else. It doesn't have to be used in a UniFi environment, and quite a lot of users actually purchased it alongside an existing non-UniFi network environment, alongside an existing Synology or QNAP NAS. Other consistent trends, the ease of the setup. There were very few complaints I heard about the system's first initialization, deployment, and early utilization. The same goes for file sharing and distribution. Pick up on SMB, the idea of the system and sharing files via a 3D barcode with configurable settings, although rather lean on the details, were all consistently praised across all of the feedback I got from real world users and other, media reviewers. And finally, the general agreement that UniFi have not overpromised on this box needs to be highlighted. All too often we see solutions, not just in NAS, but the general tech world, where there's an overpromise. There is a system that they say can do these 10 things, and at launch you can only do 3 of them with the promise of doing the other 7. This system provides everything from the looks of things that UniFi promised it would do at launch, and I think that needs to be praised. And lastly, in the 3 months this system has been publicly available, as you can see from on screen right now, there have been lots of fixes, lots of updates, lots of tweaks along the road. The devs haven't just abandoned this. This is not abandonware. We've seen everything from intuitive improvements of alignment in certain elements of the GUI, all the way down to small back-end fixes and repairs in different areas of storage on this system's utilization, both over SMB and over general internal use when you're using the file manager. Not completely, some of which I'll touch on later on, but I think it would be unfair to say that the brand has abandoned this out the gate. Now, all that said, the UNAS Pro is still far from a perfect server system. 3 months isn't a huge amount of time to apply quality control and, running out updates without sufficient time to test that feature set before it's rolled into a new version. But nevertheless, there are still omissions in the software and issues that people have encountered. Let's go through some of the most obvious ones. Number one, we could talk about the off-site backups for the system. At launch, the system only supported backing up to another UNAS, backing up over SMB to another server, and Google Drive. There's still no more than that. There isn't support of other cloud platforms, none of your large buckets online to point it towards. And off-site backup to the system are supremely limited, even now. Something I was kind of hoping they would have added at least a few other targeted services and other, SaaS services that this could potentially point towards, even domesticated budget storage options. Additionally, some users did highlight inconsistencies with the file browser experience in the web browser and that of SMB. Now, that is to be expected to a point, but simple ones that were raised, such as if you delete files in the file folder manager in the GUI, they go to the trash. Delete them in SMB and they're not there. Again, we've seen this before in other brands, but it has been remedied. By and large, though, one of the biggest criticisms that the UNAS Pro received at launch that has not seen not only no remedy in 3 months, but no indication of a remedy is the lack of iSCSI support. Now, if you don't know what iSCSI is, it probably won't bother you if you don't know what it is. But if you do know what it is, man alive, it's a pain. Being able to create raw, unfettered storage that you can point systems at that have the almost illusionary view of logical storage is hugely beneficial for a number of appliances in both home and business. Mapping network drives over SMB is just not the same. It doesn't play as nice. Often the performance is nowhere near as good. And some applications and services just will not see a mapped network drive over SMB, whereas iSCSI allows for LUN targets and LUN storage to be created and therefore it's pointing your OS at. The absence of this feature at launch was disappointing, and the fact there doesn't seem to be any clear roadmap towards that right now being shared by the brand is disappointing. Of course, the other biggest complaint people had at launch and continue to have 3 months on is to do with the way storage pools are being handled on this system. And we can break that down into 2 avenues. The first avenue, the lack of RAID 6 and RAID 0 support on this. Sorry to interrupt the video out the blue here. After this video was recorded and before publication, user Geert, I apologise if I'm completely butchering your name, did highlight to me that RAID 6 has actually now been implemented in the latest update. This took place after my recording of this video, and although it still doesn't address a lot of the multiple pools benefits that are sadly lacking right now in the UNAS Drive OS, I will say that the addition of RAID 6 here 3 months after the launch is still pretty quick turnaround, and UniFi did make it clear that they were investigating RAID 6 implementation, but hadn't seen any clear-cut evidence of that. And now, as of a day after my editing of this video, they have rolled out that RAID 6 update. You can see there on screen. So I just wanted to add that in here, and thanks again to Geert, again, apologies for butchering your name, for highlighting this to me. And this kind of spins us off on the second half of the problem there. Not only can you not create more bespoke RAID configurations, but you can't create multiple pools. Any storage you've got in the system will all be combined into a single pool. Now, why is that a problem? Nice and simple, priority and hot and cold data. Some users via the 7 bays of the system would probably quite like to have perhaps 4 or 5 hard drives with larger capacity but lower performance, but then introduce 2 or 3 SSDs into a separate pool for their hot data. They can synchronize between the two, or just have a nice priority which deviates and separates access to these storage pools based on the priority of the connected users. The absence of the ability to create individual pools of your own choice, and also once again not being able to pick the RAID configuration on them, so having some SSDs as your hot area in a RAID 0 that are mirrored against that in the background of your hard drive to synchronize in later on, is disappointing for a lot of users on a system like this. By no means the most regular complaint, but definitely one that cropped up from time to time, was the lack of containerization and container deployment on this system. Now, no one expects UniFi to roll out a complete app center on this system. It's a rather modest device, and they've never really included out a lot of their smarter and more manageable network appliances there. But offering even a limited containerized kind of deployment option of different apps and services would allow people to be able to bridge the gap with some existing appliances around their home or office. Again, you can get around this suitably and very easily by using a modest powered system in conjunction with the larger storage system, so an Intel NUC if you want to go powerful, or even something more modest like a Zimmer Blade or a Zimmer board, or one of these smaller N100 systems. You can run parallel for your containerization and pointing it at the storage of the system. But that still leads to a slightly messier setup there, and still means you are introducing a third-party portal and third-party OS into what you were hoping to be your clean, singular UniFi network. Again, this isn't something that annoyed everyone, but it was certainly a point that was raised on numerous feedback I received. Likewise, some of the feedback I received, although arguably niche in comparison to some of the more demanded storage innovations to be included in the NAS OS updates, I will say things like the lack of USB on this system is something a lot of users just weren't prepared for when they purchased it. USB, I get, can be a security hazard, but nonetheless, users were, or at least some users were quite annoyed that they couldn't inject storage easily, and therefore it complicated their workflow ever so slightly when they needed to offload storage onto client OSs, which they would then synchronize with the system. Likewise, the inability to install UniFi Protect, their surveillance platform, on this system, even though it is identical hardware to that of the UNVR system, is disappointing. I thought that during my review, and that issue was raised by several existing users.
Ubiquiti have made a choice here by not allowing UniFi Protect to be deployable from the UNAS Pro, despite the identical hardware to that of the UNVR Pro. At this point, I would have preferred Samba shares to be added and improved on my existing NVR system, rather than run both.
It's not that I expected it to be there, because most reviewers, myself included, made it very clear it wasn't possible, but at the same time, they kind of hoped that was something UniFi would entertain, and it looks increasingly that is not something they're going to entertain for the future plans on the UNAS Pro. Of course, some issues were far more user specific, but I do think they are worthy of note and sharing for those that are considering buying a UNAS Pro 3 months since launch. Swiss John was one of the users that raised, and I do mean one of many, that raised that the super admin does not have the ability to manage all backup operations for individual users.
Even as super admin, we are unable to access or even backup files for the users. Does UBNT really expect every user to configure backups individually? Crazy.
On the subject of backups, the most infuriating issue is the inability of the owner to execute them on the user drives. Any such drives are unavailable for selection in the GUI. I don't even know a workaround for this, other than perhaps giving each user some type of admin access to the console, not happening, or having them back up their personal files from their desktop. My resolution was to delete all personal drives and create separate shares, drives, for each new user. I can control their access and maintain full control as the owner.
Individual users had to manage their own backup scenarios there, which is really troublesome. It should be the case that the super admin can manage, deny, and control all backup operations.
I have uncovered a major issue it has with being unable to download files completely to any iPhone via the Identity app. Regardless of Wi-Fi or LTE, 5G or 4G mobile, if you use Safari, it failed on every file to be able to download a file in its entirety. It would download half an image or half a wave or MP3 or MP4, but not the whole file. Despite multiple emails to UniFi and going through their escalation team, they were unable to identify the issue until the end, when I worked out it is an issue with Safari. Switching to Google Chrome as the browser on the iPhone, it works. I have advised UniFi and they say they will investigate and look at a possible update as they realize now there is an issue with the driver and a bug in its ability to allow for sharing and downloading to the Files app on the iPhone via Safari.
Now let's talk about SMB transfers, because several different splinters of difficulties have been encountered in the last 3 months on this system with regards to SMB transfers. Some of them less harmful than others. Some users have reported their performance numbers over time have not been great. Now we could point to optical hard drives, we could point at the ARM-based CPU there and the amount of memory the system arrives with, but nevertheless a lot of users have been slightly underwhelmed by the performance of large file transfers to this system. Less so smaller, large frequency of data, but just the larger files in of themselves there. Now, this has been kind of coupled against issues that have been raised with regards to memory leaks and inconsistencies between primary read and write operations over SMB to the system. One user in particular raised concerns with UniFi that when they were doing high volume, that is large file transfers, large file amount transfers onto the system, when they did do the write and they went into the logs, there was large consistent numbers of errors in the write.
I have attempted to migrate my data from NAS to NAS via SMB directly over the network. On the Synology, I mapped a drive to the UNAS Pro, and while the copy jobs appear to complete, the UNAS Pro logs are loaded with permission and out-of-memory errors. When I do a file directory and size compare, there are often thousands of files that are just skipped. Most of these directories have a lot of data in them, as there are basically copies of older USB HDDs that I imported with USB copy. Personally, I think they have limits on how many files can be in any one directory, or perhaps a nested folder limit. Since these directions I am trying to copy are older HDD snapshots from older systems, there are a lot of those, not to mention special characters, in some of the file names, which the UNAS Pro seems to ignore.
Possibly due to over memory saturation there, but largely meaning that they didn't have the confidence that if they sent over, say, 2,000 files, that all 2,000 files were definitely on the system and all consistent. Now, to UniFi's credit, they have supplied 3 different fixes for this to the affected user, and they're still in the process of investigating it. But all of this adds up to software that right now, as good as the system is and as good value as the system is, the software still doesn't feel quite finished. And I think a lot of users that are looking at a system like this as their primary storage are going to be right to be ever so slightly wary. Do I still recommend the UNAS Pro? I do. I think it's a great storage system. But I think as a targeted system, it really isn't ready for the big leagues. It's not ready as a primary storage. If you're looking for an expansion to your existing storage system, go for it. Do I think UniFi are going to get bigger and bolder and better on the software? I really do. I think they are going to make more tweaks and fixes that they have already done. It's only been 3 months, and I do think they're going to expand the roster of backup targets. I do think there'll be further integration with existing UniFi network applications and services. To what degree, I'm not sure, and I do think this is going to be the first of many NAS devices from the brand, at least for now, reutilizing hardware that we've already seen in the UDM series from the brand. But this really has been, for me, 3 months of slow progress on a system that is still good but could be better. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I might come back for a video like this after 1 year just to show just how much work's been done. If you are someone that purchased a UniFi NAS and you like it, you dislike it, what is your feedback? Let me know in the comments below or email me at robbie@nascompares.com. It'd be great to hear from you. And when we do a follow-up video on this, I'll try and include as much as I can just to show just what's happening with the rig. But thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all of the feedback from all of the users on Reddit, on email, on social media, and the YouTube comments. It's been really appreciated, and I'll try and encompass all of it into an article over on NAS Compares, as well as reference in the description below everyone I've covered up to this point. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.